The Egyptian New Kingdom, one of the most famous periods of Egypt's history and certainly one of the most well documented. During this time, the land saw military victory galore, an artistic flourish of sorts, an economic soar rivaling that of the Middle Kingdom, and incredible building projects that still stand today. Many art pieces throughout history borrowed elements from Egypt's rich culture of this time that you might not even recognize. The period is marked today as the last stand as a completely unified nation in ancient Egypt. So without further ado, let us begin. It all starts with a war brought on by King Sekenre Tau between the Egyptians as thieves and the foreign Hyksos in the town of Avaris. In their previous battles with the Hyksos, the Egyptians had picked up some nice battle tactics and technology including bronze, chariots, and horses. The new pharaoh Ahmose I, brother to Kamose and the first ruler of the New Kingdom, began his reign when he was just 10. Due to his young age at the beginning of his reign, his mother, Queen Ahotep, ruled alongside him with other influences from his sister and grandmother. Ahmose I was too young to lead his army into battle, so the Hyksos were able to battle back and reclaim Memphis and Avaris. However, in the years of their reclaiming, Ahmose I was gearing up to lead a full assault upon them. He began by waging major attacks upon Avaris and Memphis, and he was able to recapture territory up to Heliopolis. He would then lay siege to the town of Shahuren until the Hyksos retreated, which gave Ahmose the time to go south and repel off enemies there. The kingdom of Kush was attempting to fight back. Kush was a growing empire to the south of Egypt, in Nubia, and Ahmose marched there with his army, claiming land up to the Second Cataract where he set up a viceroy to control Kush. While this was occurring, another rebellion was brewing in Egypt, which was quickly put down by Queen Ahotep. Ahmose proceeded to return north fully stocked with all of his newly acquired gold and forced the Hyksos back to the Euphrates River. Through his cunning and battle knowledge, Ahmose was able to restore Egypt and then some. He spent his remaining years improving Egypt in all the ways he could. His son would be a much more kindred spirit, if you know what I mean. Pharaoh Amenhotep I would begin his reign by fighting in Nubia and Libya, but this must have scarred him since he devoted the rest of his life to being inside Egypt. He improved the gateways to the Temple of Karnak, made a bark shrine and chapel to Amun, and many other building projects. Since he had such a love of building, he made a town of artisans and cemetery workers, which sounds quite like the saddest town I've ever heard of. You wouldn't believe the body I recently had to repair. Oh really? Because you wouldn't believe the body I just had to repair. Oh really? Because you wouldn't believe. Come on, you really sure got on believe. His son, Pharaoh Thutmose I, would be the polar opposite of his father. Beginning his reign by marrying Princess Ahmose, Thutmose would immediately have to show his power by putting down Nubians when they revolted at his ascension. He would go on to march with his army into Nubia up to the Fourth Cataract where he killed the Nubian king and hung his body on the side of his ship. After that show of utter sanity, he set forth to attack Syria in the north and push them back across the Euphrates River, and the Syrian princess was forced to surrender. Are you really about to say we are forced to serve under that man? Of course not. The second he leaves, we're fortifying this place indefinitely. Well, there he goes. He did one more campaign of the Nubians, and he set up a fortress that paid off by putting down a rebellion and shutting off any freedom for about 500 years. His son, Pharaoh Thutmose II, would be completely overshadowed by his sister Hatshepsut, and eventually he died, giving his throne to Thutmose III. Thutmose III was young, so Hatshepsut held most of the power and eventually just declared herself pharaoh. She would depict herself as male anytime she could because of the taboo that was a woman leading. She was very focused on being depicted as a great pharaoh near the beginning, but eventually she just decided to be one. Under her reign, the economy soared incredibly through lucrative trade and building projects. Hatshepsut commissioned the most building projects of any pharaoh aside from Ramses II. This made the economy grow rapidly due to all of the work that she was commissioning. With the newfound wealth of the land, she was able to go on an incredibly profitable expedition of the kingdom of Punt, where she would trade and receive myrrh, incense, ivory, animals, and much, much more. However, one man was incredibly tired of his mother-in-law, Thutmose III. He hated his mother-in-law's peaceful ways and would go on to try and erase her name from history. During his mom's reign and making the land even more prosperous, Thutmose III was taught the ways of battle strategy and conquest. Since Hatshepsut was incredibly peaceful and not one to be up in arms, territories from up north had stopped sending tribute like Palestine and Syria, steadily grew in control of themselves. Beyond the Euphrates River, the kingdom of Mitanni had grown in power and was becoming a threat to all around the Mediterranean. These three nations then formed a coalition for the sole purpose of fighting Egypt, and during this time of crisis, Hatshepsut died, leaving Thutmose to solve it in the only way he knew how.
Bloodshed.
Thutmose III took his army and marched down the Aruna Road, the path no one expected him to take. He got the jump on the Palestinians, but they got away due to his looting, and he was forced to lay siege to Megiddo. That is, until 8 months later they surrendered. He then looted them, took some royal children, and completely knocked Palestine out of the war. Syria was next, and he marched up to Kadesh and completely ravaged them. Same as Palestine, he looted, took royal children, and Syria was out of the war, with Mitanni being the only thing left of the coalition. The army was brought to the Euphrates River and they crossed it, leading to an all-out assault of Mitanni. The results of the battle ended with hundreds of soldiers and members of the Mitanni king's harem captured. Thutmose III then honored Thutmose I by putting a stele right next to his, on the riverbank from when he came to the Euphrates River. He then honored the actions of Thutmose I by attacking the Nubians for control of more land. And he won! Kyrgyz and Nabato were both a part of Egypt, and he built a temple of Amun there, and periodically harvested gold from their mines. This funded Egypt for nearly the rest of the New Kingdom. Far-off nations were terrified of Egypt, and places like Greece, Assyria, and Babylonia all sent gifts to show their allegiance to it. Thutmose III finished his reign in the country he worked so hard to protect, and he commissioned great monuments. However, he still was mad at Hatshepsut, and he worked tirelessly to remove her name from monuments and works. She would be gone to the sands of time if she had not made as many monuments as she did. He spent his final days basking in his glory, and with his death, his son Amenhotep II came to the throne. He tried to live out the warrior king life like his father had, but he wasn't the best at it. He did many different campaigns of Syria and he won, but they were already tired from their fights with Thutmose III, and he was just cleaning up any ideas of revolt and he was successful, I guess? It's just that beating a nearly dead horse isn't the most honorable thing to do. His son Thutmose IV would overshadow him in terms of diplomacy and in maintaining power. Although in the early days he was quite preoccupied. Free me! What? I said free me, damn it! Oh, Horus. Yeah, now that you see who I am, restore the Sphinx, and you'll be Pharaoh or whatever. Well, cha-cha! So yeah, now Thutmose IV was Pharaoh, and he went on a tour of Syria to find any sort of rebellions brewing. He then saw the trouble that was the Hittite Empire slowly growing, so he sorted out a peace agreement with the Mitanni, just in case they wanted round 2. They did this by marrying off a Mitanni princess to Thutmose. Thutmose IV then left to go south to Nubia, and see if any revolts were going on there, and there was. This was resolved by him marching down to the rebels and politely aiming all of his army's weapons at them. His reign was short, and he passed the almighty Egyptian power to his 12-year-old son, Amenhotep III. Diplomacy was his main goal, so he married a girl from a very powerful family in Egypt named T, and he would periodically send charitable donations to other countries to ensure their allegiance to Egypt. He also won the favor of his people by setting a policy of not sending off any Egyptian women as wives to other nations. He also supported religion immensely, and worked hard for new monuments and shrines to be made that were dedicated to the gods. One of these monuments was a palace at Malkata, and T and him would go there often together. He helped him run different state affairs while Thutmose was off doing building projects. Improve the roads, hire more workers. The cult of Amun is rapidly growing in power and wealth, and may soon have more power than the pharaoh. And we're out of light bulbs! That's right, a growing force of wealth and power had been making itself clear ever since the dawn of the New Kingdom. The cult of Amun had been growing slowly in power, and owning more and more land. They had made sure to keep ties with the royal lineage and gave them religious titulary all of the time to show that they were there with good faith. However, in the time of Amenhotep III and beyond, the royal family began feeling threatened and tried disrupting the flow of the cult. Amenhotep III would start this off slowly by associating himself with the sun god Aten instead of Amun, but this had little effect over the citizens or the cult. He died and the throne was handed off to Amenhotep IV. Everything seemed fine at first with his rule since he followed with all of the same policies that his father had. At least, that's how it began. Suddenly, and out of nowhere though, Amenhotep IV had outlawed all practices of worship and religion to anyone but Aten. He dubbed himself Akhenaten, and Egypt would begin what is known today as the Amarna period. The capital city was changed from Thebes like it had been for centuries and changed to the city of Akhetaten. The people were outraged. Why does Akhenaten have to involve himself in everything we do? Like, why would he even care whether or not we like Aten or Mun? It's all the sun in the end! You know, that sounds a lot like heresy. There's only one god, Aten. Who are you to tell me what to do? Oh, come on! Akhenaten then gave up all of his political and state affairs and left them up to his wife, Queen Nefertiti, since he believed he was above ruling for the people. The country's wealth was being depleted rapidly, and the economy, ruling class, and the citizens were all now suffering. People were out of jobs since most were tied to the ancient religion. Akhenaten then decided he would deify himself, and due to this, would completely ignore all duties that weren't religious, which caused previous alliances to break ties with Egypt like Babylon. Throughout his entire rule, Akhenaten had broken alliances, started the decline of the economy, and brought civil unrest to his people, all by installing brutal policies that denied them of their culture. As the final act of his reign, he passed down the crown to his 8-year-old son Tutankhaten. King Tutankhaten, being so young during his reign, was advised by Ai, an elderly official who had been long associated with the royal lineage, and Horemheb, a general to his armies. Tutankhaten would move the capital from his father's city of Akhetaten back to Thebes. He then changed his name to King Tutankhamen, while doing work to restore the old religion, going against his father's old policies. Although young, King Tutankhamen could see the damage done to Egypt by his father and worked hard to restore it to what it once was. Unfortunately for him, his time would be cut short as he died early into his reign and he could only start the building of a few monuments. Since he had no heir, his advisor Ai would come to the throne after a foreign prince attempted to marry Tutankhamen's wife, but was assassinated on the way there. Ai was incredibly old, however, and would pass 4 years into his reign, and he was replaced by Tutankhamen's other advisor-in-general, Horemheb. Horemheb had seen the chaos caused by Akhenaten firsthand, and he knew what had to be done. He fully dismantled the policies of Akhenaten like Tut and I before him, with one small difference. At his coronation, he claimed Horus had chosen him to restore Egypt, and he ordered all traces of Aten to be removed from the Temple of Karnak and the destruction of the city of Akhetaten. With that, he had won over the trust of the people, and he continued to do so later into his reign by sorting out affairs with foreign powers, stopped nobles from being corrupt, and bringing justice to those who went without punishment. He would give back land to the priests of Amun and dedicate monuments to the old gods. His 28-year-long reign was that of a miracle to the Egyptian people, and he would close out the 18th dynasty by dying with no heir. Since Egypt was without a pharaoh, the vizier of Horemheb, Ramses I, took the mantle, and since he saw that his time would come to an end soon, he made his son Seti I co-regent with him. Seti was a military commander, while Ramses stopped doing building projects at Karnak, and eventually Ramses was no longer around. Throughout his entire reign, Seti I was focused on military campaigns, and his first was when he led his army into Palestine and Syria, where he battled against many different tribes. He even had one battle against the Hittites. He spent the rest of his years as pharaoh working on the restoration of quarries, wells, and mines, continuing work on the hypostyle hall at the Temple of Karnak and fortifying Egypt. His son, Ramses II, would become the new pharaoh after his death, and he would come to be one of the most famous of all the pharaohs. Now, this pharaoh may be a tad, how do I say, controversial. Although I absolutely love that movie to death, Ramses II documented his entire kingship the most of any pharaoh. He also made the most monuments of any pharaoh. He wanted to never be forgotten, much akin to the famed Ozymandias. Ramses II was not the Exodus pharaoh. However, he did do plenty of other things. Before he was pharaoh, Ramses was brought alongside his father in military conflicts with Syria, and he led his own campaigns against Nubia with his sons. When he was co-ruling with Seti, massive building projects and restoration projects were instated by Ramses II. He was angered with the Hittites for taking Kadesh, for them ruining a trade route he had, and he wanted to take what was rightfully his, so he engaged an ally of theirs and massacred them all on the Nile Delta. Ramses II would then go on to do lots of side quests, like building a palace called Per-Ramessu, attending festivals, and praying to the god Osiris. "Please, Osiris, give me strength to win my conquest over the Hittites and Syria as a whole." Well, get on with it already then! With an all of a sudden rushing adrenaline, Ramses was finally off to do what he originally set out to do, and finally marched out to Canaan with his army. He was preparing to take back Kadesh, which his father had unfortunately lost to the Hittites. He divided all of his army into 4 divisions and an elite task force. The main divisions marched along the Orontes River, while the task force was sent further ahead to the Eurystheus River. The main army captured 2 Hittite spies who said that Kadesh was empty and that the army was further back. Ramses ordered the army's encampment at Kadesh to rest before they battled, but somehow the 2,500 Hittites were all conveniently placed behind one singular wall. They hit the army hard and left them all scattering, with the pharaoh only having a small group by his side. Everything seemed hopeless until the elite task force broke in and chased the Hittites all the way back to the Orontes River. With this absolute Egyptian victory, everyone wanted a piece of Ramses, and constant fighting between Egypt and Syrian tribes occurred for years on end until Ramses finally pulled out of Syria and the first peace treaty ever was signed. That took like 10,000 years, guys, come on. Ramses decided to focus on his nation now and make monuments galore. Famous buildings of his include mortuary temples for him and his father, the Hypostyle Hall of Karnak, temples in Nubia with his statues, and many more. During his astounding 66 years of ruling, Ramses had set a name for himself as never being forgotten, and the people thought anarchy would happen without him. The son to Ramses, Ptah, was 60 by the time of his reign, and he immediately had a major conflict coming straight towards him. The combined population of Libyans and Sea people were all marching to Egypt to have somewhere to settle to. Due to famine around the Aegean Sea, many people were left wandering to find a new place to settle, and they had collapsed other civilizations that attempted to house them. Ptah, seeing them encroach on Memphis and Heliopolis, was having absolutely none of it. Come on, people! All we have to do is walk at them with our heads down and our hands out, and surely they'll let us in! So yeah, Ptah had a very violent rule and dipped out, giving the reins to his son Seti II. Or at least that's what would have happened if it weren't for the usurper Amenmese, who stepped in and took the throne from him, gaining control of Upper Egypt and Thebes. Seti II then fought back and gained his rights to the throne and dedicated the entire rest of his reign nuking any information of Amenmese. And they were related. That's drama. The next two pharaohs did the best they could to not document their reign, so we skip over Ptah Siptah and Tosret and move on to the 28th dynasty with Setnacht. When Tosret's reign was over, the struggle for who was at the top was immense, since Ramses II had about 100 children, so a lot of them had a claim to the throne. Pharaoh Setnacht was the only one to stand above the rest and establish a presence, so he could put down rebellions in the more Asiatic parts of Egypt. He was able to put down rebellions just long enough for him to have a male heir, Ramses III, who would begin the Ramesside period of Egypt. The reign of Ramses III was quickly overrun with turmoil when the sea people of before had returned to seek refuge with their numbers increased. Ramses III conscripted plenty of new soldiers to ensure his armies would hold strong against them. The seasoned veterans were placed on the northeastern border and the newbies were on the coastline. 2 assaults of land and naval contact were launched by the sea people, and despite their name, both of those things failed. They then settled into different tribes of Palestine, which made Egypt lose it as a territory. At the same time, civil conflict was brewing inside Egypt as conspiracies against the pharaoh were made. A coup d'etat was formed against Ramses IV by his harem members. His vizier was ousted for corruption, a labor strike was occurring for a lack of payment, and eventually it all boiled over when the coup was launched and Ramses III would later die due to his injuries. His son Ramses IV was given the throne while young and he had great hopes for the kingdom. He set out on many expeditions for resources and commissioned lots of building projects. However, the nobility was getting more and more corrupt, while going unpunished and taking every piece of the Egyptian pie. The priests of Amun were getting more power again, and Ramses IV prayed to Osiris to give him a reign longer than Ramses II, but he only ruled for 6 years before his death. It's kinda mean, Osiris. Ramses V and Ramses VI both had similar struggles as the priests gained more power and Libyan raiders would come and attack small towns. Ramses VII had the unfortunate situation thrust upon him, and the economy started dipping immensely, as the price of wheat and barley soared. Ramses VIII's documentation of his reign is lost to the sands of time, and nothing is known about his reign. Ramses IX's reign would be a little more interesting though. The high priest of Amun, Amenhotep, was beginning to run the country, and he organized both governmental and religious functions. Libyan marauders were still raiding the lands, and the common practice of grave-robbing pharaohs' tombs began. In the time of Ramses X, we know that Libyans were still attacking and the citizens wouldn't listen to him or Amenhotep. When Ramses XI came around, Amenhotep was replaced by the viceroy of Nubia, Haile, who then decided to leave and take all of the Nubian territories that were a part of Egypt. The Libyan, Herihor, became the new high priest and he repeatedly promoted himself and demoted Ramses. With that, Egypt was split. The Theban monarchy was replaced by the new dynasty of priests, and we close out on the New Kingdom. The Egyptian New Kingdom really tells an incredible story. It tells how we have to strive to do good on our own, because no matter the accomplishments of the people of before us, things can change very quickly. There were indeed pharaohs that came from immense wealth who turned the kingdom into ruin, but at the same time, there were pharaohs who only had hope, and yet they still restored it. The New Kingdom was the last peak Egypt experienced in its ancient history, and the balance of the land would never be quite the same. Still though, even with it being the last kingdom of Egypt, it certainly was not the final stand of the ancient Egyptian people.